Okay, I got the readers on. It is that time of night to start a Debbie Macomber, Denim and Diamonds. One of my favorite books. I actually used one of my Harlequin coupons to get this book at Walgreens in May, and it has been that good. So let's go ahead and give you what it says it is about on the back, and then we'll start hitting the paper clips. Second choice or second chance. Restless teenager Leroy Ellison left Red Springs, Wyoming with an audacious dream. She was going to LA to become a superstar, and she was never coming back. Now, nearly 10 years later, Letty returns to Red Springs with one last hope. Chase Brown. Chase never left Red Springs. His ties to the land are what kept him from following Letty. So when she returns home with a bruised ego and a young daughter, wary Chase needs to ask himself a tough question. Is he just the backup plan, or is he finally on the threshold of happily ever after? Well, let's start reading book one, shall we? Of course, it says Debbie Macomber is a #1 New York Times bestseller author, a leading voice in women's fiction worldwide. Her work has appeared on every major bestseller list with more than 170 million copies in print. She had multiple award winners, Hallmark Channel based on television series on the Debbie's popular Cedar Cove books. And now we're going to start Denim and Diamonds. I want to start, she says on here, to Karen Macomber, sister, dear friend, downtown Seattle explorer. We're going to start with the prologue. So here we go. Dusk had settled. It was the end of another cold, harsh winter day in Red Springs, Wyoming. Chase Brown felt the chill of the north wind all the way through his bones as he rode Firepower, his chestnut gelding. He'd spent a better part of the afternoon searching for 3 heifers who'd gotten separated from the main part of his herd. He found the trio a little while earlier, bullied them back to where they belong. That tactic might work with cattle, but from the experience, Chase knew it wouldn't work with Letty. She should be here in Wyoming with him. 4 years had passed since she had taken off for Hollywood on some fool dream of becoming a singing star. 4 years. As far as Chase was concerned, that was 3 years too long. Chase had loved Letty from the time she was a teenager, and she loved him. He spent all those lazy afternoons, page 10, with her on the hillside, chewing a blade of grass, talking, soaking up the warmth of the sun, and he knew and felt something deep abiding for him. Letty had been innocent, and Chase had sworn that she would stay that way until they were married, although it had not been hard to make love to her the way they always had wanted, the way he had wanted. But Chase was a patient man, and he was convinced a lifetime with Letty was worth the wait. Let's see. Is that all I have marked here? Hold on. Okay, I guess we're going to keep reading here to get through the prologue. When she graduated from high school, Chase had come to her with a diamond ring. He wanted to share his vision of Spring Valley, have children, and fill the emptiness that had been such a large part of his life since his father's death. Letty had looked up at him, tears glistening in her deep blue eyes, and whispered that she loved him more than she thought she ever loved anyone. She begged him to come to California with her, but Chase couldn't leave his ranch in Red Springs any more than Letty could stay. So she'd gone after her dream. Okay. "5 years later, Letty Ellison was home. She hadn't been back to Red Springs more than 9 years. She was astonished by how little the town changed. She was determined to come home a star. It hadn't happened. Swallowing her pride, she was returning to the town, the ranch, without having achieved her big dream, which was the one thing. But to show her up on her brother's doorstep, throw her arms around him, and casually announce that she could be dying was another. So she's dying. Or is she? Or what is going on with Letty? Page 20. Letty stood, her arms wrapped protectively around her waist. One question that had been burning in her mind from one minute when she pulled into the yard, one she was needed to ask, but whose answer she feared. She tentatively approached the subject. "Will you be seeing Chase?" She asked this to her brother. "I do most days. Does he know that I'm back?" Lonnie's fingers gripped the back of the door handle. "He knows," he said, without looking at her. Letty nodded, and she curled her hands into fists. "Is he, married?" Lonnie shook his head. "Nope, and I don't imagine he ever will be, either." He hesitated before adding, "Chase is a lot different now from the guy you used to know. I hope you're not expecting anything from him, because you're headed for a big disappointment if you are. You'll know what I mean once you see him." A short silence followed, while Letty considered her brother's words. "You needn't worry that I've come home expecting things to be the way they were between Chase and me. If he's different, that's fine. We've all changed." Lonnie nodded and was gone. That was page 20 and 21. Okay. Page 22. Running a brush through her short curly hair, Letty composed herself for the coming confrontation with Chase. Walked calmly down the stairs. He and her brother were sitting at the table drinking coffee. Lonnie glanced up when she entered the room, but Chase looked away from her. Her brother made a point of telling her that Chase was different, and she could see the truth of his words. Chase's dark hair had become streaked with gray in her absence. Deep crevices marked his forehead and grooved the side of his mouth. In 9 years he had aged 20, Letty thought, with a stab of regret. Part of her longed to wrap her arms around him the way she had so many years before. She yearned to bury her head in his shoulder and weep for the pain she caused him. But she knew she couldn't. This is page 22 and 23. "Hello, Chase," she said softly, walking over to the stove, reaching for the coffee pot. "Letty?" He lowered his head in the greeting, but kept his eyes averted. "Good to see you again." He didn't answer that. Instead, he returned his attention to her brother. "I was thinking about separating part of the herd, driving them a mile or so south. Of course, that means hauling the feed a lot farther, but I believe the benefits will outweigh that inconvenience." "I think you're going to a lot of effort for nothing," Lonnie said, frowning. Letty pulled out a chair and sat across from Chase. He could only ignore her for so long. Still, his gaze skirted hers, and then he did his utmost to avoid looking at her. "Who are you?" Letty turned into the doorway, where Cricket was standing, blanket held tightly in her hand. "Cricket, this is Uncle Lonnie's neighbor, Mr. Brown." "I'm Cricket," she said cheerfully. "Hello." Chase spoke in a gruff, unfriendly tone, obviously doing his best to disregard the little girl, in the same manner that he chose to overlook her mother. Okay. A small cry of protest rose in Letty's throat. Chase could be as angry with her as he wanted. The way she figured it, that was his right, but he shouldn't take his bitterness out on an innocent child. "Your hair's a funny color," Cricket commented, fascinated. "I think it's pretty like that." Her yellow blanket in tow, she marched up to Chase and raised her hand to touch the salt and pepper strands that were more pronounced at his temple. Chase frowned and moved back so there wasn't any chance of her succeeding. "My mommy and I are going to bake a pie for Uncle Lonnie. Do you want some?" Letty held her breath, waiting for Chase to reply. Something about him appeared to intrigue Cricket, the unnerved Chase, who made it obvious that he'd like nothing better than to forget her existence. "I don't think Mr. Brown is interested in apple pie, sweetheart," Letty said, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Then we'll make something he does like," Cricket insisted. She reached for Chase's hand and tugged, demanding his attention. "Do you like chocolate chip cookies?" "I do, and Mommy makes the really yummy ones." For a moment Chase stared at Cricket, and the pain just flashed in his dark eyes went straight through Letty's heart. A split second later he glanced away as though he couldn't bear to continue looking at the child. "Do you?" Cricket persisted. Chase nodded, although it was clearly an effort to do so. "Come, Mommy," Cricket cried. "I want to make them now." "What about my apple pie?" Lonnie said with his eyes twinkling. And that was page 24. Okay. It's just such a good book, it was hard not to mark up each and every page, but I'm trying to pick out the important parts to share with you. Page 27. You're pale. That could be attributed to seeing Chase again, but Letty didn't say so. Their brief meeting had left her feeling melancholy all afternoon. She'd been so young, so foolish, seeking bright lights, utterly convinced that she'd never be satisfied with a lot of ranchers' wives. She wanted diamonds, not denim. Page 29. Lonnie followed Cricket into the room, his face a study guilt and frustration. "What happened?" Letty asked, stroking her daughter's head. Lonnie threw his hands in the air. "I don't know. I turned on the TV, was watching the news when Cricket came in here to see cartoons." "There aren't any on right now," Letty explained. Cricket sobbed louder and lifted her head. Tears ran unstrand down her cheek. "He said no. Real mean. She started talking to me in the middle of the story about a rodeo championship in Vegas. For Pete's sake." Lonnie stabbed his fingers through his hair. "Cricket, Uncle Lonnie didn't mean to upset you," Letty told her. "He was watching his program and you interrupted him, that's all." "But he said it mean." "I hardly raised my voice." Lonnie came back, obviously perplexed. "Are kids always this sensitive?" "Not really. Cricket normally is an easygoing child. Fits of crying were usually the result of being overtired. It was probably a combination of the flight and a busy day." Lonnie turned and nodded into the living room without speaking to Cricket directly. Letty watched him go with a growing sense of concern. Lonnie hadn't been around children in years. He didn't have the slightest notion of how to deal with a 5-year-old. Cricket had felt more a rapport with Chase than she did her own uncle, and Chase had done everything to ignore her. Letty spent the next few minutes comforting her daughter. This is 29 and 30. After giving Cricket a bath, Letty read a story and tucked her in for the night. With a hand on the switch, she acted out a game they played. Cricket was 2. "Blow out the light," she whispered. The child blew with all her might, and at that precise moment Letty flipped the switch. "Good night, Mommy." "Good night, sweetheart." Lonnie was waiting for her in the living room, still frowning about the incident between him and his niece. "I don't know, Letty," he said, apparently still unsettled. "I don't seem to be worth much in the uncle department." "Don't worry about it," she said, trying to smile, but her thoughts were troubled. She couldn't schedule the surgery if she wasn't sure that Cricket would be comfortable with Lonnie. "I'll try not to upset her again," Lonnie said, looking doubtful, "but I don't think I relate well to kids. I've been a bachelor for far too long." Bachelor. That was it, the solution to her worries. Every evening she'd been thinking about how lonely her brother was, and now he needed someone to share his life. The timing was perfect. Her gaze flew to her brother, and she nearly sighed aloud with relief. What Lonnie needed was a wife, and Letty was now determined to find him one, and fast. Okay. Let's try to read the first 50 pages. Page 32. "Mommy," Cricket whispered loudly enough for half the congregation to hear her there at church. "The man who likes chocolate chip cookies is here. He's 2 rows behind us." Page 33. "Chase." Letty released an inward sigh. Just as she suspected, he was the one challenging her appearance in church, as if her presence would corrupt the good people of this gathering. Letty mused that he would probably be like if she wore a scarlet A so everyone would know she was a sinner. Lonnie had warned her that Chase was different, and he was. The Chase Brown, Letty remembered, wasn't judgmental or unkind. He used to be fond of children. Letty recalled that years ago when they walked through the town, kids would automatically come running to Chase. He usually had coins for the gumball machine tucked away in his pocket, which he'd dole out judiciously. Something about him seemed to attract children, and the fact that Cricket had taken to him instantly was proof of his appeal. An icy hand closed around Letty's heart at the memory. Chase was the type of man who should have married and fathered a house full of kids. Over the years she had hoped that he had done just that, but he hadn't. Instead, Chase had turned bitter and hard. Letty was well aware that she had hurt him terribly, and how she regretted that. Chase had loved her, but all he felt for her now was disdain. In years past he hadn't been able to disguise his love. Now, sadly, he had difficulty hiding his dislike. Letty had seen his wounded look in his eyes when she walked into the kitchen the day before. She'd known that she'd been the one to put it there. If she hadn't been so familiar with him, he might have been able to fool her. If only they could alter the past. "Mommy, what's his name again?" Cricket demanded. "Mr. Brown." "Can I wave to him?" "Not now." I want to talk to him. Exasperated, Letty placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder and leaned down to whisper, "Why?" "Because I bet he has a horse. Uncle Lonnie won't let me ride his. Maybe Mr. Brown will." "Oh, Cricket, I don't think so." "Why not?" the little girl pressed. "We'll talk about this later." "But I can't. Can I ask? Can't I, please?" The elderly couple in front of them turned around to see what all the commotion was about. "Mommy," Cricket persisted, clearly running out of patience. "Yes, fine," Letty agreed hurriedly, against her better judgment. Page 34. From that moment on, Cricket started to fidget. Letty had to speak to her twice during the 15-minute sermon. During the closing hymn, Cricket was turned around to wave at Chase. She could barely wait for the end of the service so she could rush over and ask about his horse. Letty could feel the dread mounting inside her. Chase didn't want anything to do with Cricket, and Letty hated the thought of him hurting the little girl's feelings. When the final prayer was offered, Letty had added a small request of her own. "Can we leave now?" Cricket said, reaching for her mother's hand and tugging it as if the concluding burst of organ music filled the church. Page 35. Letty nodded. Cricket dropped her hand and was off. Letty groaned inwardly and dashed after her. Standing on the church steps, Letty saw that Chase was walking toward the parking lot when Cricket caught up with him. She must have called out his name because Chase turned around abruptly. Even from that distance, Letty could see his dark frown. Quickening her steps, she made her way towards them. "Good morning, Chase," she greeted them, forcing a smile as she stood beside Cricket. "Letty," he said, as he had his hat in his hand, and he rotated his brim, as though eager to make his escape, which Letty felt sure he was. "I asked him already," Cricket blurted out, glancing up at her mother. From the look Chase was giving Letty, he seemed to believe that she put Cricket up to this, as if she spent precious time thinking up ways to irritate him. "Mr. Brown's much too busy, sweetheart," Letty said, struggling to keep her voice even controlled. "Perhaps you can ride his horse another time." Cricket nodded and grinned. "That's what he said, too." Surprised, Letty gazed up at Chase. She was grateful he hadn't been harsh with her daughter, for somewhere deep inside she dredged up a smile to thank him, but he didn't answer it with one of his own. A fresh sadness settled over Letty. The past would always come between them, and there was nothing Letty could do to try and change that. She wasn't even sure if she should try. Page 36. "If you'll excuse us," she said, reaching for Cricket's hand, "there are some people I want to talk to." "More people?" Cricket whined. "I don't even know there were so many people in the whole world." "It's nice to see you two again, Chase," Letty said, turning away. Not until several minutes later did she realize that he hadn't echoed her greeting. Page 39. Lonnie walked in, and Chase immediately recognized that he was upset. Chase solved the pitchfork into the hay and leaned in against it. "Problems?" Lonnie didn't answer him right away. He couldn't seem to stay in one place. "It's that fool sister of mine." Chase's hand closed around the pitchfork. Letty had been on his mind all morning, and she was the last person he wanted to discuss. Lonnie appeared to be waiting for a response, so Chase gave him one. "I knew she'd be nothing but trouble from the moment you told me she was coming home." Lonnie removed his hat and slapped it against his thigh. "She went to church this morning." He turned to glance in Chase's direction. "She said she saw you there. Actually, it was her kid, Cricket, who mentioned your name. She calls you the guy who likes chocolate chip cookies." He grinned slightly at that. "I was there," Chase said tersely. "At any rate, Letty talked to Mary Brandon afterward." A smile sprang to Chase's lips. Mary had her sights set on Lonnie 3 months ago, and she wasn't about to let up until she got her man. "Wipe that smug look off your face, Brown. You're supposed to be my friend." "I am." He lifted a pitchfork of hay and tossed it behind him. Lonnie had been complaining about the Brandon woman for weeks. Page 40. Mary had done everything but stand on her head to garner his attention and a wedding ring. Lonnie stalked aggressively to the other end of the barn, then returned. "Letty's overstepped the bounds this time," he muttered. "Oh, what did she do?" "She invited that Mary to dinner tomorrow night." Despite himself, Chase burst out laughing. He turned around to discover his friend glaring at him, stopped abruptly. "You're kidding, I hope." "Would I be this upset if I was? She invited that woman right into my house without even asking me how I felt about it. I told her I had other plans for dinner tomorrow night, but she claims that she needed me to be there to cut the meat. 9 years in California, and she didn't learn how to cut meat? Well, it seems to me that you're stuck having dinner with Mary Brandon." Chase realized he should have shouldn't find the situation so funny, but he did. Chase wasn't keen on Mary himself. There was something faintly irritating about that woman, something that rubbed him the wrong way. Lonnie had the same reaction, although they never discussed what it was that annoyed them so much. Chase supposed it was the fact Mary came on so strong, and she was a little too desperate to snare herself a husband. Brood and Lonnie paced the length of the barn. "I told you, Letty, I was only staying for dinner if you were there too." Chase stabbed the pitchfork into the ground. "You did what?" "If I'm going to suffer through an entire dinner with that woman, I need another guy to run interference. You can't expect me to sit across the dinner table from those two." "Three," Chase corrected absently. Lonnie hadn't included cricket. "Oh, that's right. 3 against 1. It's more than any man can handle on his own." He shook his head. "I love my sister, don't get me wrong. I'm glad she's decided to come home. She should have done it years ago. But I'm telling you, I like my life exactly as it is. Every time I turn around, cricket's underfoot asking me questions. I can't even check out the news without her wanting to watch cartoons." "Maybe you should ask Letty to leave," a part of he wasn't proud of, prayed that Lonnie would. He hadn't had a decent night's sleep since he found out she was returning to Red Springs. He worked until he was ready to drop, and still his mind refused to give him the rest he craved. Instead, he'd been tormented by resurrected memories he thought he'd buried years before. Like his friend Chase had created a comfortable niche for himself, and he didn't like his peace of mind invaded by Letty Ellison. "I can't ask her to leave," Lonnie said in a burst of impatience. "She's my sister." Chase shrugged. "Then tell her to uninvite Mary." "I tried that. Before I knew it, she was reminding me how much Mom enjoyed company. Then she said that since she was moving back to the community, it was only right for her to get to know the new folk in town. At that time, it made perfect sense, and a few minutes later, I agreed to be there for the stupid dinner. But there's only one way I'll go through with this, and that's if you come too." And that's page 40 and 41. 42. "Cancel the dinner, then. Chase, how often do I ask you a favor?" Chase glared at him. "All right, that kind of favor. I'm sorry, Lonnie, but I won't have anything to do with Mary Brandon." Lonnie was quiet for so long that Chase finally turned to meet his narrow gaze. "Is it Mary or Letty who bothers you?" his friend asked. Chase tightened his fingers around the pitchfork. "Doesn't matter because I won't be there." Page 45. "Good morning, Chase," she greeted him simply, unwilling to see the bitterness in his gaze. She didn't look up from the stove. Lonnie stepped outside for a moment. "Pour yourself a cup of coffee." "No, thanks, already." He turned his back to the door. "Chase," her heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it might leap through her throat. The sooner she cleared the air between them, the better. "Do you have a minute?" "Not really." Ignoring his words, she removed the pan from the burner. "At some point in everyone's life." "I said I didn't have time, Letty. But if you're figuring to give me some line about how life has done you wrong and how sorry you are about the past, save your breath, because I don't need to hear it." Page 46. "Maybe you don't," she said gently, "but I need to say it." "Then do it in front of a mirror." "Chase, you're my brother's best friend. It isn't as if we can ignore each other. It's too uncomfortable to pretend there's nothing wrong. As far as I'm concerned, nothing is wrong. But save your breath, Letty." He said it again. Men can be so stubborn and hard-headed. I guess we're going on a little bit. 55. "Don't ever do that to me again," Lonnie grumbled as soon as Letty was back from escorting Mary to the front door. She sank down in her chair beside him and closed her eyes, exhausted. She didn't have the energy to argue with her brother. If he was looking for an apology, she'd give him one. "I'm sorry, Lonnie. I was only trying to help." "Help what? Ruin my life?" "No," Letty said, her eyes flying open. "You need someone." "Who says?" "I do." "Did it ever stop to think that it's a little presumptuous on your part? You're gone 9 years, then you waltz home, look around, and decide what you can change?" "Lonnie, I said I was sorry." He was silent for a lengthy moment, then he sighed. "I didn't mean to shout." And that is where we will stop for tonight. Stay tuned. More moments from Denim I can't talk tonight. From Denim and Diamonds are headed your way soon. As well as a rating, because, the rating doesn't come until I get done finishing the moments with y'all.